right, my friend. Man, I jumped out of bed this morning and man, there's just this LLM stuff is just bananas. I fell down a rabbit hole yesterday of like content pyramids and splintering content and repurposing content and stacking no code tools.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bananas. It's like, hey, you can take this thing, which will come up with some substance based on your target audience and keyword search volume, and then it'll put together a script, and then you pass that to like a synthetic thing that's a face and a human that will spit it out. And now you have like your base video, and then you put it into this thing, and then it'll splinter it into a TikTok format, Facebook, bing, 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 and it'll automate all the publishing across those platforms. I was like, whoa.
Dude,
it's like there's gonna be a lot of content.
Document everything. Because that ultimate guide that I sent you, I added that into my ClickUp, and I've been keeping track of my own links that I've been finding and using. I just want a big public directory of open source shit, bro.
I love it. Oh man. Cool. All right. So I mean, this is the first one, and honestly, I think we just keep it as raw as we can, and just kind of talk through it, and we'll use the Substack for the love of the game. Acquire and operate Micro SaaS is kind of our guiding light. And the hope is to just kind of, a lot of folks out there aren't readers. Some are listeners, some are watchers. So let's try to accommodate. And I think add just a little bit of color to what we're doing. Because I think, again, our hope is to inspire some folks that are in maybe the venture play as an operator, or they're private equity sponsored, or they're working at a corporate, to think about search and entrepreneurship via acquisition, as it were. And Micro SaaS is kind of an interesting place to play. So let's jump in.
I agree. My business partner, Sebastian, when I shot him over the one we were going to be talking about today, he was like, dude, I love the way Kjael writes. Like, I got to subscribe. I'm like, dude, subscribe.
Right on. And all set, man. I just found my way into another Slack. I mean, it's so funny how we all end up in the same spots over time, but I was in like a Slack channel group with Wax and that crew, and Seb's like, Kjael, like, why are we always in the same spots? I was like, oh, what's up, Seb? All right.
Cool. Like, for us, he lives in those communities, because that's true marketing. Like, when you and I talked about lead gen being dead, he was the one that actually drove that thought for me, where the focus is demand gen. What is your content doing? What communities are you in? Like, how is your positioning in the market? Because no salesperson can go outbound and truly drive it the way you want. So I'm like, dude, do what you got to do. And that's all he's been doing, just living in communities for us.
I like that. And that, for context too, forgive me to the audience, the future audience. So my name's Kjael.
Like a whole intro, the logo, the virtual background.
Yes.
Rough cuts.
Rough cuts. And I'm president of Scaling Ventures, and my background is in SaaS go-to-market. I was a CRO for a few years, a VP of sales for a few years. I ran my own consulting firm, helping mostly Series A groups kind of transition from like that founder-led sales motion into something that's a little more repeatable. And that's when I met Kjael, who runs an agency. I was kind of like the strategic lead on those consulting engagements. He was the whiz that pulled it all together from a RevOps, which we're trying to kill the term RevOps, because it's just makes no sense. We're going with technical ops. And Kev and I have chopped it up for years, and I invited him on here to be my partner in crime, and just have a dialogue. And so the thought process is to chat it up on a bi-weekly basis, go through some of the stuff that we're writing about in terms of deals, and some other stuff. Kev, what would you got, man? What'd I miss out on?
You didn't miss anything. I'd say the one little piece you could add in there is that I'm essentially the tech guru for any crazy ideas that come up. So you name it, we build it, and then we build it in public. We talk about it to get you guys excited and inspired.
Perfect. All right. So cool. So let's jump in. So I think for today, we're going to start with the last issue of For the Love of the Game, which was a little bit of a departure from our typical programming, if you will.
However,
where a lot of
it was a great departure.
Were you vibing it? I got to say, I got some really positive feedback. Like, text message to me like, yo, love this issue. And I was like, what, why, right? Because you can't just settle for that. I was like, why? And it was like, it's just kind of the different strategic vantage points when you're thinking about acquiring a business. And as our context changes over time, right? Like we're moving towards a portfolio type ecosystem, and what does that kind of mean? So with that, and it dawned on me, I'm going to record. So real quick, and our hope is not to just read the Substack out loud, but I did just want to pull it up real quick. Yeah, and give it a little bit of context. See this one, yeah? Okay, beautiful. My screen's on the other camera, and that's just a straight up, or my calendar, I should say, is on the other screen, and that's just a straight panic attack. So we don't want to do that to the folks. All right, right on. So we've got this issue was we kind of introduced a new strategy concept, which it goes by a lot of different terms, but I think let's definitely touch on that, and then let's talk about the actual deal. And for context, for those that have never read it, one of these, so we usually every 2 weeks we'll look at a deal, and it's kind of like a case study to be like, hey, here's a micro SaaS acquisition opportunity. Here are the strengths, the weaknesses. Here's how we think about it. I'll do some very light kind of scenario modeling just to look at what the potential returns would be, but that's like aim small, miss small, kind of just directional stuff. I'm not really getting it. We have a turnkey model that we use. It's not what you would consider like a fully beefed out, LBO model, et cetera. Those are definitely not fun generally, and the thought of doing those on a biweekly basis makes me want to jump out my window. So we look at a deal and acquire and operate. It's kind of the headline, right? So let's look at a deal with our acquirer hat on, our buyout kind of private equity hat on, and then let's look at an operating framework from an operator's perspective. So something that's either highly repeatable, a template, just something to inspire. And then musings is just the weird shit that's going on in my head at a given point in time. Cool. So let's so I'll leave it at that. So what's interesting is and had you heard of Kjael, like that concept?
So this was the first time I heard of that concept, but it made the most sense. And I think that's what stood out to me from this entire breakdown. Most acquirers, they're just focusing on the next best deal. This conversation is focused around what is the best deal that can then empower the rest of our portfolio to drive the type of returns we weren't even thinking about initially.
Totally. And obviously Japanese culture is so badass, but when someone had first kind of exposed me to Kjael, where simply put, it's basically like everybody kind of opts in a community. And there's a lot of detail. It was like kind of post World War II, they had torn down a lot of the monopolies. And so you had these communities where it was like, hey, let's all give each other a piece of our respective businesses and then help each other. So it's kind of like a high tides, all ships rise kind of methodology.
Yep.
And it's just cool as shit. And if you can study it, it's endless. And another way to think about it is in a portfolio context is like vertical or horizontal integration. There's tons of stuff in Investopedia, but traditionally speaking, private equity buyouts, what we do, micro SaaS acquisitions, it's like, is this a good deal? We're going to acquire this business and we have a plan to make this business more valuable. Does that make sense? Right. And so this is kind of a departure from like the most base case thought process. And it's like, hey, we have these 4 or 5 companies. If we acquire this company, who gives a shit if it generates a return? What does it do for the value and the growth and, everything that we want to do on the other side? And I should have used an example in the thing and just kept it simple, but it's like, yo, if you have a portfolio of 30 Airbnbs, or not even 30, if you have 5 Airbnbs, or if you own 5 rental properties, maybe you should just buy your own cleaning company. Yeah. Or maybe you should buy a plumber service, right? Or whatever, because that'll change kind of the cost structure in your portfolio, or it's a quick way to grow a different asset and like kind of ensure revenue. And the thing that's a little bit heady that gets me the most jazzed about it is that like you keep a dollar in your circle,
Yeah. It's essentially it's introducing the concept of becoming more vertically integrated, but earlier. Instead of you growing to become that large enterprise that now wants to acquire all your various complementary ancillary services and competitors, we're saying, even from a micro perspective, start thinking about how you can be vertically integrated because it cut costs up front. and it drives revenue better.
Totally. And yeah, and that's a good kind of distinction to make, right? Where it's like, this is not a conversation around like, hey, we're going to acquire this company. We're going to acquire an adjacent competitor or kind of a downstream thing or an upstream thing to make this individual asset more valuable. It's like, hey, we're going to buy something that all of these assets that we own can use. So anyway, call it what you want. I like Keiretsu effect because it sounds like a samurai ass thing, and I'm super down with that kind of stuff. You know? All right, cool.
I mean, we've all watched the movies growing up.
Oh, I mean, it's just badass. And I should have used an example. I went with XYZ and it kind of just read confusing. Cool. So let's bounce over and let's just look at the profile of this deal. I'll do the old screen sharer again. And so we had, cool. So here's the headline, right? So, and I won't read any of this stuff, but this is the important stuff. So they're asking $450K for it. Trailing 12-month revenue was $107K. Founded in 2019. They got a team of 7. Oh, I didn't add in the product stack. Oh, but the product stack is lean and mean. It's like React and Node. It's modern, right? And and it would have to be because we go into some of that stuff with like, with data assets, right? So that's the other thing that's kind of interesting is conventional assets in a deal. When you think about business assets, Kev, what do you think about?
When I think about business assets in a general sense, it always comes down to something either physical or almost tangible. So what is your actual product, your web application? Let me get that, your code base. Then it's the people. If you have an office space, it's the real estate. But beyond that, we have to start thinking, what is an unconventional asset that we can leverage?
Totally. So core assets are product and customers. Right. And sometimes it's like, hey, we don't even give a shit about your product. We just want to acquire your customers because we're going to move them over to our platform. This is like a kind of a merger type scenario, or it's a strategic acquisition, whatever. But and to your point, key employees are obviously assets. And that's something that can get super weird when in our game where it's like, hey, we bought this firm and it turns out Bill and Jan were, the rock stars and they left. And now the business is, just flatlining. And it's like, ooh, it turns out that the product and the customers weren't the sauce. It was Bill and Jan. It's like, oh boy, get them back on the horn. And so what's interesting, right? So, and it seems like, and this is, I think, part of like a side hustle for this crew, but they want a 4x, which in Micro SaaS, anything north of a 3 is kind of interesting. And it's kind of like, why is that multiple there? Because the profitability
it's
here,
subject to more due diligence.
Yeah, 100%. Or there's got to be something dope nasty, right? Because, and that's the thing. And that's what's interesting in our category, because it's like, hey, typically multiple is a function of scale because the markets think that the larger a business is, the safer it is. When we kind of challenge that assumption, or the more durable it is, enduring, whatever kind of cliche business school speak you want to use. Whereas for us, we're like, a business that's had 2 or 3 years of profitability at like a 40 or 50% margin seems pretty durable to me. And I don't really give a shit if it's, not producing 5 million in recurring revenue, or it doesn't have a team of 30 people. We actually kind of find big headcounts, big teams, punitive. But long story short, profit margin's not there. That's probably a function of having 7 heads on the bench. And they're growing like a weed, 70% growth, right? Which is 99th percentile. I think at 30, if we're looking at like profit well benchmarks and stuff, and this is on an annual basis. So if we did, so that's growing at 5.8% a month. Anything north of like 3.5% a month is bananas. So this is when there's growth like this gets the VC's attention, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if there are some venture shops that are kind of eyeballing this one. All right. So headline stuff here. Yeah, I guess what stood out to you when you were looking at the deal?
The machine learning aspects and the fact that they've already started using AI included, and the pricing is usage based. Not only do they have unconventional assets that sets them apart from the competition in a saturated market, they also have a pricing model with infinite growth potential if we execute the right way.
Beautiful. So say more about the usage-based price, like OG SaaS. How'd it work?
OG SaaS says, hey, well, you purchase something, you download a software, and I'm going way back in computer science days.
Yeah, sorry.
You purchase something,
not that OG.
you download something. if we're talking original SaaS, it's only you pay every time you use. And then it became a subscription for unlimited usage, but that became limited with tiered pricing plans. You can only access certain features depending on your subscription. Now, companies are starting to realize that hurts their bottom line with just letting folks run wild. So they're having a hybrid pricing model across the industry, baseline subscription, and then usage on top of that. How much data are you consuming? And we're going to price it by each data point. And that in itself has allowed companies to survive over the last decade of being able to monetize usage much more differently than original SaaS monetization with just base subscriptions.
Beautiful. So OG was like AOL, floppy disk, CD, like we're going like way back. Like that was before software as a service, right? Like this was software that was local to your machine. Now all of a sudden we have kind of on-prem, we have the evolution to the cloud, right? Now, okay, cool. Everything's cloud-based. Now we can deliver this software online and we can treat it like a service. And we can now base it around
it had to be on your own server until we had virtual machines. And then when we had virtual machines, it cut out the expensive cost for large IT teams. But now a lot of that cost went into the consumption for virtual machine usage.
Totally. And like the Don Datas, I mean, Salesforce, I think would be considered as one of like the first cloud native companies. And there were some groups that saw around the corner, right? And they're like
IBM.
Oracle, totally. And they made huge bets, right? And then and they made a killing ripping on-prem data servers and stuff like that and migrating to the cloud. But anyway, so that's like way back. I meant like, generally speaking, it's like, hey, you're selling a CRM, you're selling an HR tool, you're selling an accounting suite. It's like a user-based thing because that was the best
one
trick.
Thing and then
it was
you
like,
run wild.
It was like, hey, you've got a license to this and it's based on a human that's accessing the thing. The challenge is that in terms of like value containers, and if you follow Tom Tungus and some of the other like PhD pricing people, what you're trying to do is align, or value-based pricing is the number one thing, because otherwise you get into a price battle and then game theory comes into it and you look at airlines, right? You erode the profit margin because you try to compete on price. So when it's value-based, usually it has to do with the utility. And in software, kind of the big breakthrough was, oh my goodness, we can charge them literally incrementally as they extract more value from the tool. So the simple way to think about it is like data, right? It's like, hey, the more photos you store, the more you charge. Right. Instead of being like, hey, here's one access and you can like, I don't know, store some photos and we're just going to figure it out, but it's $100 a month for one head. So it allows for better alignment of mid and long-term incentives and value creation and consumption. So with this group, and I loved it too, because it's like, hey, their whole value prop is you have web traffic. We're going to convert that into structured leads. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to enrich it. So it's like, holy shit, Kevin came to your website. He's the founder at CMT. These are, whatever else they can enrich it with. Here's his Facebook profile, here's the stuff he's into, yada, yada. And then as a marketer or whoever I am, people are coming to my website. I can action that lead list. I can target them with ads. I can get some outbound email going and I can personalize that stuff based on the data they have. So to your point, this sets up real nice for a $100 a month to play the game on a user-based, kind of a seat-based structure, or maybe it's per website. And then, hey, it'll be $1 a lead or whatever. Right. So we love that, because then that also sets up for how can we enable them to drive more traffic to their website, right? Which will sell them a service to help drive traffic to their website, which, oh, by the way, is going to generate more leads. You get into this very virtuous cycle, which is pretty trippy. So that's cool. Usage-based pricing, that's something we love. Cool. So let's move on. The only thing I wanted to touch on about growth, I guess do you sell LeBron James?
Do you trade LeBron James, or do you wait to see if he's going to retire or not?
Or like the only time you sell LeBron James is when you know that his Achilles or his ACL is hanging on by a thread, right? So like when someone's like, "Oh, it's growing 70% year over year," it's like, okay, but like there's a small fire burning in the basement that's going to burn the whole house down, like, or what the hell's going on here? Because you don't sell your cash cow, right? And so I think when you see that
what
growth,
are the risk factors we're not looking at?
or what's wrong, right? Or I think immediately you kind of get on your toes. And so like the things that we talk, like seller's motive is obviously critical, just understanding that. And then the other thing is growth isn't nearly as sexy. I mean, if growth is like this, and churn is like this, it's basically like the boat's getting bigger and sinking faster at the exact same time. So that stuff nets out and it's not nearly as sexy. So we would want to dig into some cohort and then we would decompose the revenue and understand, is retention holding strong? Because if growth's ripping at 70% and they're maintaining like median, even bottom quartile. So think like, they're retaining or their month over month, like net retention is north of 93 or 94%. Which means we had 100 customers at the beginning of the month. We've got 91 or 92 heading into the second month of that cohort, and they're growing at 70%. That's when you see bonkers growth. So cool. So now let's talk data assets. Okay, no doubt. So the obvious one is they have a data set to enrich the folks that come to your website. So Kevin comes to my website. It's like, boom, CMT. We know that this is his email address. We know that these are his LinkedIn history. This is however they're enriching it. But typically it's like firmographics, right? Who are you, your firm, how many employees, yada, yada, your job title, maybe your work history, your education, technographics. Maybe they can grab that. And it says, we know that if we go to CMT's website, he's got HubSpot, he, use Wappalizer. Like there's, some weird shit out there of this thing right here that you can use to just figure out kind of what the stack is. So there's technographics, et cetera. So over time, it makes sense that they're selling structured leads as those kind of leadless balloon. They're capturing and building a proprietary data set. So that, and I guess it's so funny. We get so excited about data sets. What would you do with that data set, Kev? How would you grow? And we're keeping our portfolio a little bit anonymous, but a company that we just bought, how would you grow? Let's just say B2B, SaaS, sells into SMB, the creative market. What would you do with a data set of 14 million private businesses? How would you help any business grow?
With 14 million private businesses. So the way I would go about it is really just thinking about my own perspective for my own business. I would use it as an entrepreneur for retargeting. If you think about it, there's lead gen and demand gen. We keep saying lead gen is dead. It's hard to go outbound. So if we're thinking demand gen around content, positioning, affiliate marketing, getting into communities, if all of that is really what you're relying on to drive leads, imagine how successful you can be when you start retargeting everyone that's coming to your website. Because at that point, your marketing team isn't focused on casting a wide net. They are focused on literally just dropping content in strategic places to get people to your website, and that is your lead pool. You literally have an enriched list in real time of people you can retarget to scale your business just like that without having to spend tons of money and hiring tons of people.
Cool. And like conventional would be like a clear bit intent thing.
Zoom info, engage, Apollo, sales simplify. A lot of companies are trying to do this, but what you're doing is just subscribing, spending $50,000 plus a year, and you're just downloading data sets that might be out of date. What's better, people are coming to you, you're getting updated information, and they're a much warmer lead than who you may have purchased from a cold database.
Beautiful, because there's some interesting concepts with data assets too, right? Like data decay or erosion.
Exactly. And they say every 3 months to 6 months, you need to refresh your data because it's already started to decay after the first 30 days.
Exactly. Like the simplest example is people change jobs, right? So it's like, hey, we're acting on a data set that's 6 months old. It's like, I'll bet at least 10 to 15% of the personas or the contacts you have probably changed jobs. Cool.
Yep.
So you mentioned ML-based feedback loops. I mean, I get super jazzed about this one because I guess it's like a human tuned algo. And I think we got to be careful that we don't just succumb to like hardcore buzzwords, but like, conventionally it's like, hey, in this scenario or you start to see models really perform well and like, this is probably not the most PC, but it's like Tinder, right? Swipe right, swipe left. And that feeds back into the model. And it's like, okay.
It learns your match.
It learns your match, like straight up. And that has so many applications. And those little kind of algos are proprietary in their own right. And in this one, it's like, hey, was this a good lead or a bad lead? Bad lead. Cool. We're not going to surface those up anymore or with the same frequency. But that's obviously, there's applications galore. Was there anything else that stood out to you on the feedback loops on the ML bit?
overall, I just love the thought of, if we think about how we want to scale lean companies in a sense where we don't have to hire large teams and someone dedicated to support over and over. If you just had one person that's providing support responses, right? Or on the flip side, you have a user that is constantly putting in the types of profiles of the people that they're looking to enrich. This machine is now learning how to always be accurate for you on, let's say, the lead prospecting side. On the support side, the machine is now learning how to answer questions accurately without the need for having a human, because you've already taught it once. So it's essentially just driving more efficiency within the business, which allows us essentially to focus on what's causing that churn, because the business itself has the tools and the features to self-learn, self-train, provide all the answers we need internally and externally, so we can just spend most of our time focused on the things that are stopping the business from growing. In a sense, the
Beautiful.
machine learning is allowing the business to scale itself.
Or it's the old, I mean, it's like, because I think the big thing for us is like this, the first component of a system, right? You have inputs and outputs is a loop, is a reinforcing loop or some kind of feedback loop.
Exactly.
Thinking in Systems, totally dope book, recommended to me by a dear friend. Oh, I have it on the, but if anybody's interested in learning more about that, Thinking in Systems is fucking radical. Okay. So yeah, because I think what's interesting, right, is it's like, hey, support responses. Hey, let's use some kind of generative AI and we'll train it on all the kind of proprietary, non-public business information, and it's going to spit out responses to resolve support tickets. We can come in and be like, bad response, or swipe left is bad, bad response, good response, good response, good response, good response, bad response, red. And that little human overlay is the fine tuning that really starts to let her rip. And the same could be said for personas and customers. Or what gets really interesting is it's like, hey, you said this was a bad lead, or you said this was a good lead, it didn't convert, right? Or there's different stuff like that where you can start to tie outcomes back into the outcome. Cool. And then I think the last bit, and we'll keep it moving here, is you know, they already piped into GPT 3.5 Turbo's API. I'm not sure what the use case is here. It's definitely something generative. It's probably a CS bot when you when you land on their website or something like that. Or I don't know what it is, but
I will say, if the LLM is integrated, that's for the enrichment portion. That's part of the project we're working on. That's the enrichment engine.
Shit. Yeah, it could be enriched totally. That's
so think about
exactly
it.
What they're
LLM
doing.
is the enrichment engine, and when you say this data is not accurate, the ML process is what's feeding back to the LLM saying, hey, you need to go find better data. And the LLM comes back and tries again. That's the engine.
Ooh, buddy.
The LLM is a
Radical.
GPT-3 Turbo, and the ML is the fine-tuning model from ChatGPT. It's just the two working together.
I love it. And so this is almost like a criticism component or a gate on how the model's enriching. Ooh,
that's why I love this business example, because this business can scale itself while we focus on what is stopping the business from growing.
Oh man, that is lit as shit. Wow.
For everyone listening,
dude.
Pardon the French words.
Yeah, nah, whatever. We're keeping it real. It's all good. We'll try not to drop any F bombs, I suppose. Everything else is fair game.
But we get
Okay,
excited
cool.
about
Well, dude, just those kind of reinforcing loops give me totally fired up. I mean, that's bananas. I love that stuff. That's so good. All right, cool. So strengths, pretty straightforward. I'm sorry, my kiddo just walked in. And my wifey, they just went for a little walk. Maybe one day we'll get little Odie in here. He's about as cute as they come. All right, risk factors. I mean, what don't you like about a lead gen tool, Kev?
Oh man. Well, like we mentioned earlier, when you're thinking traditional lead gen tools, you're buying leads out of a cold database with folks who may have decaying data. You don't know how long they've been in there, when they were last refreshed, things like that. And when you look at these types of competitors, the tools on the page are tools we're all familiar with using, but they get us about 80% of the way there. And then it's like, do I have to build the other 20%? Who is this person? Where did they come from? What do I need to know about them to actually get in front of them? And then what do I need to say to turn them into an evangelist? Lead gen tools do a horrible job of answering those questions. And teams today are just dumping tons of money and getting very little ROI from it. That is my frustration.
Yeah. Or it's like, hey, I'm just going to buy a different version of a phone book. Right. And a lot of times,
That's
how do
it.
those phone books get populated? It's businesses that are kind of banging the phones. It's like, hey, Kev, you still a CEO over at CMT? Cool. Do you still have 4 or 5? Nope. Okay. All right. You're going to hang up. Okay. What's growth look like? Okay. Bye. And then they
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
update some database. Right.
And
Yeah. But I mean, and,
now,
like,
if if you wanted to learn, now there are software tools that are doing that. They're just calling you. And for anyone listening, if you see a number you don't recognize and you answer, and there's no one there for 2 to 3 seconds, and then it just ends, that's a software
oh, yeah, hang up.
validating your phone number is still accurate. Don't answer those
Yeah. Right.
numbers.
Don't answer those. Hang up quick. Well, and I just the list too. I mean, it's like HubSpot, Marketo, Salesforce, Soho. So I guess this is kind of like funneled in, or lead gen is spoke off of the wheel that is CRM. And
Yep,
CRM is one of the most mature B2B enterprise categories ever. So you got to have some sand to go compete here. And I think that's the main
exactly.
thing where it's like, hey, and this is kind of counter to micro. Like we want to compete in the
Hmm.
niches, however potato, because that's where the jumbo incumbents aren't playing. Because the biggest
Hmm.
fear ever is like, ooh, we bought this lead gen thing, and oh shit, HubSpot just rolled out, website converter to lead thing, and it's like, oh man, they had this cooking, and they're gonna step on us in a quarter or two. And that's the fun part about SaaS, right? Is you can take markets and you can move fast. That's the good
Yep.
side of the coin. The less than awesome coin is someone can come and take your shit. And that's back to like the old, somebody's in a garage cooking, right? And you got to be careful that
Hmm.
they don't come and get you. But then you have to think about that's at the small scale. Like we hope to be that crew. But on the other side of the spectrum is you don't want the jumbo incumbents to just step on you or sneeze on you, honestly, and kill you. So anyway, it's competitive as hell. We would need to feel really, really comfortable that we can get in here. And the other side of the coin here, and maybe we'll just touch on that real quick, is that when there are strategics in the category like this is it does set up for kind of a begin with the end in mind strategy, which is we
Hmm.
acquire this thing with from day one a clear line of sight into what we build in terms of product roadmap and how we grow it in terms of market
Hmm.
share acquisition to position us for a strategic acquisition. So that's, I guess, one of the benefits when there are some incumbents where it's like, ooh, we know HubSpot, like we did a full feature matrix. We understand exactly where they're ripping. We understand what their product roadmap looks like. Maybe we're reading their
Yep.
earnings calls or whatever. We know they're going to build a bunch of cool shit over here. This little spot here is neglected. And ooh, if they can fill that gap, they've got a vertically, horizontally, very interesting integrated platform play here. Boom, let's build it and let's just build it for them, sell it to them, right? Just put it right in there.
Exactly. And that's part of knowing your value and where you stand in a saturated market. If you know there's big players where this one minor change can boost their stock price, now you have more leverage in the negotiations.
Yeah, 100. And that's where you get the big valuations too.
Hmm.
When the strategic, because there's synergy in the business and the whole valuation calculus changes a lot. So if you can sell to anybody, sell to a strategic.
Yep. And
Cool. And then
if you can get some insider trading, and I know that doesn't sound the best, but when you're a developer, you know how to talk to other developers in these large companies to understand what's going on. If you can figure out what they're building and if it's close to what you're doing, that just gives you more ammo to build faster and get it in front of them faster because companies, they would much rather acquire than to hire and build.
yeah, totally. And that's the old build partner buy calculus too.
Hmm.
Or acquihire. There's just a lot of stuff in M&A that's interesting. When you have, kind of corporate development, there's whole
Yep.
huge, functions within these firms that just go, and then they have corporate venture. There's a whole bunch of shit there. But
Yeah.
all right, cool. The last thing to mention is this business relative to the deals we look at, right? Which our kind of base case formula is a lot of debt. And I guess it depends on who you talk to. Maybe a lot of debt's depends on your preference, right? Debt's the thing that'll kill you. So you got to be careful how much you take on, right? If you don't pay your debts, they come and take your house or they take the business. If you give away equity and it goes to zero, everybody's just sad. So our kind of base case recipe is we'll put 15% cash or equity down. We're going to ask the seller to give us a 10% note, which is basically the seller loaning us some portion of the purchase price, and we'll pay it back to them over time. And then the rest is debt. What's challenging is if you're doing 100K in ARR and you're going to pay 450K for the business, and let's say we did our typical ratio here, then that means
Yeah.
we would have to pay off 55K debt, 55K in just to service the debt a year, which is more than 50% of the revenue. So that's like, ooh, that's like, hey, I'm going to
Yeah,
take a
it's a problem.
mortgage. Like my income's 100 grand. I'm going to take a mortgage for half my income, and then I'm just going to have to figure out the rest of it. And it's like, probably not. That's a little tight, That's, and the water level is just right below your nose. So if you miss at all, you're going to drown. So anyway, so we'd have to rethink our typical deal structure, and we do that. Cool. For quick wins, I think we can, kind of hit this quick. Obviously, we acquire this firm, we would want to implement it across our portfolio. Obviously, the portfolio is pretty small nowadays, but in the future, it could be interesting and it would supercharge growth, right? So, or hypothetically, it's a no-brainer to implement this company at all of our firms. I was kind of joking around, but I thought another thing would be just to go hard, and like, again, the riches are in the niches. Just go hard at micro SaaS operators. Like, yo, we priced this for micro SaaS. Like, are you trying to scale a B2B SaaS thing? Cool. And just start with that as like a little morsel of the addressable market in the SMB, and see if we could rip it, provide preferential, pricing, maybe team up with like the marketplaces or like Andrew over to Acquire, who knows? But I thought that could be kind of something interesting. And then as we spoke about positioning for that strategic exit out of the gate. Cool. So just to recap, we're talking Keiretsu effect, acquiring businesses that are super useful across the portfolio that you got. And probably in this case, they're also awesome. They present a really good return profile. But our case, we chatted through strengths, risk factors, some of the quick wins. From an acquisition perspective now, if we're just kind of looking at this as an individual asset, and we did some market comps. So we looked at micro SaaS firms with ARR of 100K to 150K. And the asking price comp was 800K. So we'll give it 2 thumbs up, right? Because our group's asking for 450, or this firm's asking for 450. Comparable revenue multiple was 6x. That's again 2 thumbs up because they're just asking for 4.3x. And then trailing 12-month profit margin was 72%.
Yeah.
Which is, for us, we're way, way below that at 22%. But that's something that we would solve for, right? And again, it's back to like, hey, 7 heads on one P&L. I'm sure they're fractional or whatever, but we could totally revamp the cost structure, or at least really look at the P&L and get clever.
Right out the gate, I think we can hit 3.5 or a 40%.
Yeah.
40%.
Because I was thinking, and I was thinking, and we can touch on that in terms of the return scenario, because obviously our model is like super basic, but at least at this stage. But kind of like, what are the minimum costs? Because I had to kind of scratch my head and think about this one. It's like, some type of maintenance like engineering capacity or capability, and then customer support just to keep the trains on time. But we'll touch on that. So last thing is growth. They're growing better than the average bird that's doing 100K to 150K in ARR, average bear. So one thing here, like a disclaimer, and then we go into return scenarios, and always micro is bananas if you're used to looking at typical lower middle market private equity, because the velocity, right? So we can acquire these companies in 30 to 60 days. Typical lower middle market kind of M&A processes, buyout acquisition processes are 6 to 9 months. I think if you're being fair, if you've got a dope nasty bank that runs a really tight process. So that's what juices the IRR for the most part. And then the quick transformation as well. So we're thinking about things on a 3-year cumulative timeline from acquire to exit. But here we had to kind of change the fundamentals. So instead of putting in 15K cash, we would put in 15% cash. We put in 40% cash. So that's 184K. And that changes kind of the piece. The thing that's interesting is that the growth is so bananas, right? So, and typically we do 1 to 3 scenarios. In this one, we just did a base scenario. It's like, hey, keep this thing growing at 70% if you can in year 1, and then let's get probably back to reasonable growth in Y2 and Y3. So Y1, we're looking at 6% net growth, and I gave it median churn. And here we can bounce in on this too. This is always a little tough to see. Yeah, let's bounce in here. Cool. So we've got, that's a little better, eh? So we've got 6% net growth and 5% median churn, right? Which is, again, is average SMB that's doing 0 to 25K MRR on a monthly basis. If they start with 100 customers, they're going to end that month with 95 on average, right? So we're going to say, hey, we've given them median churn against their comps. Growth in Y1 is 6%, which is crazy. And then Y2, Y3 would get back down to something more reasonable, which would be 3% net growth, which is like, 30 to 40% annual growth. And then OpEx. So I cut it down to engineering and customer support, which I think I budgeted like 20K per. So it was like 60K ish of OpEx across personnel or talent being engineering and customer support. And then, and some kind of, and there was a light marketing spend in there as well, which I think was like 8% of revenues. And then a tech stack spend of 20K per year. So this is more expense than we would be comfortable with. And then the last assumption here is that we would exit out of 4. And I mean, the thing is, we're not buying this, or we wouldn't buy this because because we think we could, generate a spanking return. But shit, we could generate a pretty spanking return here if all those things go well, right? Like we're looking at break even in 2.75 years, average free cash flow a year 77, gross proceeds. So we basically turn 184K into 1.2 million in a 3-year timeline, which is crazy. And this is all, take this with a grain of salt, right? This is the most basic model under the sun. And 70% growth. It's hard to go wrong if anything's growing at that rate. And probably churn, this is probably too nice. This is probably 6, 7, 8%. Like there's no way they're operating at median churn, and this is the name of the game. But anyway, that's that. Anything to add? I know I just threw a shitload of numbers at people, and this is going to be totally disorienting if you're listening to this. So my apologies, but it's a good deal on its own. Relatively speaking, it's a great, kind of cash on cash return, IRRs north of 3 figures, et cetera. Anything you would add to the deal lens here? Is there another scenario that you could have thought of? I didn't want to go too hard into the scenarios because it's just like, hey, we would acquire this because it would make everything else way doper. But
no, scenarios, you would need a whole other call for that.
Yeah. The only other one I was thinking is like, I don't know. It's like maintain that kind of growth, but then assume a higher churn. But anyway, I thought it was kind of foolish to pursue that. All right, cool. So let's change gears. Lastly, we got, or on the operate side, so do you know the business model canvas?
Yep, I actually went through it I'm going to give a shout out, Rochester Institute of Technology's Simone Center, the accelerator program. I am one of the entrepreneurial leads. Yes, we study the business canvas at the Simone Center.
Cool. This is a great coffee table book. Holy shit. This one.
The Exponential Business Canvas.
So the business model canvas book. Yes, this one. And it's just a beautiful book. Like, let's see if we can flip through a few pages.
We used to have the whole PDF exercise just kind of like mapped out on a whiteboard, and everyone's just going in, filling in the boxes.
I mean, it's just
the book is well put together.
It's just extraordinary, right? And so kind of the original bit and tip. I mean, if you remember, let's just pull up an image. If you remember back in the day, it was like, what's your business plan? And it was like, oh God. Here's this 30-page document that sucks, that you can't comprehend. And oh, by the way, business models are iterative. So you're going to have to.
By the way, I used to be in business consulting in college, and we would try to push $1,000 one-page business plans front and back, just with summaries of every section, punchy bullet points. And if you needed something larger, $10,000. And let me tell you, we would certify this bad boy and let people take it to the bank, and it actually worked.
Oh my God. Well, it's like, hey, so it was like simplicity is mastery, right? Occam's razor, keep it as simple as you can. You're going to be in the best shape. So here, like,
all off the canvas. You don't need 30 pages. Use the canvas, you get 5 or less pages.
and it was just beautiful. I mean, and it kind of revolutionized kind of lean, agile methods, 0 to 1, MVP, kind of all these kind of conventions around best practices for reducing the risk of failure and just overinvestment in a startup context. It ripped it, right? So simply put, it's like, hey, you've got a value prop in the middle. The money's in the middle, basically. And then on this side, you have your costs, which is partners, activities, resources, some commentary around the cost structure generally. And then on this side, you have the stuff that generates the revenue. So you've got what kind of relationship we're going to have with customers, who are our segments, how do we reach them, what are the channels that are available, and those culminate into revenue streams. And so it was a beautiful way to think about the business and like the costs and the infrastructure and the shit you need. And then on the other side, how you want to touch your customers, the nature of your customers, where they live, how they operate, what your channels are, and that stuff comes together in terms of cost structure, revenue stream, value prop, happy days. And it's meant to be a super
Absolutely.
liquid thing, right? It's like, ooh, actually channels, we were wrong. Take the post-it off, ditch that one. It's a new post-it. So it was a beautiful way to kind of iterate, right? Because you want to be learning machines, especially early, or just generally you want to be a learning machine. But it was a way to kind of quickly make
100%.
adjustments. And if we're comparing this to, an OG business plan that's like 30 pages, it's like, dude, no one can even understand this. And if we need to change it, and how do we communicate it to other people? Anyway, bottom line is that this was kind of a very revolutionary thing. But sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say a lot of folks always comment, what if they taught how to manage taxes, finances, build a business, how to do marketing, do sales, do all these things in school. Even folks outside of school that aren't in business, they don't normally get exposed to these things. So what I would say for everyone listening, if you have a kid going through school, get them signed up for a business class. If you've ever thought about starting your own business, look at the business model canvas. This canvas, when you dive through each piece, and I mean really in depth to get pen to paper, this is the essential of a business MBA when you get to the end of it.
I totally agree. Because it's like, oh, you really understand channels in isolation or in a vacuum? Great. That's kind of worthless. So understanding these puzzle pieces and generally how they fit together is critical if you're going to have kind of commercial awareness on how you take inputs and turn them into outputs and generate a profit, right?
Exactly.
Beautiful. So then this crew, and here's a little bit of commentary and it talks about it, but XO Canvas, and it's like this concept of exponential organizations. And so this is kind of a riff on the business model canvas. And I love this because this focuses on leverage, right? So it's like, so kind of OG business model. Oh, here we go. OG is like, key resources, key partners. The XO business model is like, can we build a cloud of external employees such that we don't have to bear the cost of full-time employees? Which labor activity tasks can we automate? What types of, there's just so many. How can we leverage gamification to improve our products and services? How can, there's just questions that it asks that are, and the whole theory is to kind of fixate on like 2 or 3. So it's like, hey, we have our business model canvas. Let's think about the XO kind of context here. And where are some areas, and you want to fixate on like 2 or 3. And the hope is that if you fixate on 2 or 3 of these things in the broader context of the business model canvas, you'll find operating leverage in the business and you'll generate kind of 10x returns. So whether it's how you experiment and how you learn, how you, the data strategy. So this is like usually the ones that it comes down to is about how you acquire and make use of data and include data in a feedback loop that makes the business smarter over time. How do you break traditional cost structures and cost models, which is taking fixed costs and turning them into variable costs, or automating the shit out of them and taking out the human element altogether? And then how do you experiment and learn over time? And then the last one is dashboards, which, I mean, this is all the stuff that we kind of, it's weird to say it out loud because this is like, you start to fixate on the leverage and it's usually pretty consistent across, whatever entity you're working on. But then the last one is access to data. Right. And I guess the throughput is like data and automation, honestly, because that's, you guessed it, how you create leverage in any context. Cool.
Yeah.
XO business. Yeah.
Simply put, the business canvas model is going to be the foundation for building the business. The XO business canvas is going to be where you find your points of leverage.
Love it. Boom. What he said. All right. Lastly, musings. This is kind of interesting. I'm not sure that I did a very good job kind of articulating this. I think, when I looked at it, and God, dude, when's the last time you got into Ben Horowitz's OG blog before they turned it into, and everyone starts with a rap video. It's so good. It's so good, dude. Like, it's honestly just incredible. So this one, and he basically converted this into a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is exceptional. Oh my God. At the beginning, it's like his story. And obviously he's a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. He's, he's probably like, he's just a legend, a goddamn legend. But this book is so good. And the beginning is kind of his story. And then he gets into management principles. And so I was going through this one. And
oh Lord.
And it's so good. But the one that you get into is Like the basic
You could
idea
use
is,
anything but that video.
oh yeah, I know this. Oh, which video is this?
Not Duro. Oh my
Dude, oh
god,
yeah,
bro.
get big.
Dude,
Yeah, well, he's like he has a lot of Jada Kiss, a lot of
I know.
like Eric B and
I love
Rakim.
I
Like
love
he's
the
like OG hip hop.
realness. It's just so comical when you like go to these places to get like really good information, and then you see they start with like a rap video. It's like, dude, okay, we know what you're listening to at home.
But yeah, but I appreciate him. He's like, you know, peak like 88 to like 98 hip hop. Um,
Yeah. You know
but anyway,
what this reminds me of, like whenever folks do this, especially Ben, and this is a quick tangent for those listening, on Instagram, when you see those like memeable videos where it's like you just walk up to a random person like, hey, what are you listening? They're dressed in a suit and a tie, but when you put it on, it's like Tupac going crazy.
yeah. He's like, oh, you know, I'm listening to Wu-Tang. It's like, oh
Yep.
shit.
I'm
All
gonna go
right, good
slay
for
this
you.
meeting, Shaolin
Yeah,
style.
yeah. I see your yes, excellent. All right, but his whole the concept here is that as you scale, and there's interesting stuff where like if you look at just the nodes in an entity as you scale headcount, it's like, okay, so let's say it's just me and you in an organization. That's back to forth. Bing, 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 bing. Communication is smooth as shit, right? So communication's cool. Common knowledge is very basic. Decision making's fast. We add a third node, right? Now it's not just you and I. Now I have a second node, you have a second node, and that person now introduces two nodes this way. So it scales. That was kind of a shitty explanation, but it scales exponentially. So you want to add heads, and his message here is give ground grudgingly when it comes to scaling headcount, because it makes the three kind of pillars of performance, which are communication, common knowledge, and decision making, infinitely more difficult. And so for us, right, back to kind of micro SaaS, I'm like, ooh, like we have lean teams, remote, fully digital, tons of async communication. We're very tech enabled. And so my thing was like, and obviously we want to repeat what we're doing. We want to make our playbook hyper repeatable. So I'm like, okay, typically, you know, in a business or, you know, call it whatever, private equity backed, lower middle market, venture backed, Series A. It's like, cool, we've got our objectives and we have our key results. And we're going to look at these we're going to touch them on like maybe a weekly basis with our leadership team. And there's whole layers of management. We've got middle managers, then we've got frontline kind of individual contributors. We have no idea what they're doing. And it's very hard for them on average to say, hey, I'm doing this thing and I know exactly how it ties back to my objective. So it kills their association with meaning, impact, and all the shit that if you survey kind of our generation or millennials or, you know, whatever's below millennials, they're like, hey, I don't really get much meaning from my work because I have no idea how it associates to what we're trying to do. So
Right.
would
It's
you agree with
created a
that?
culture. I would 100% agree with that. And to add to it, it's created this long running culture where people are more focused on being busy and conducting activities versus driving results.
Totally. Or that's, yeah, God bless. So I'm like, ooh, with us, like I can literally be like, this is the objective. Here are the key results, and here are the individual activities that get us to those objectives. And I kind of over fixated on that because I started to think more about the inputs and the process. And that doesn't set up cool in a team context either, because like you don't want to, that's a micromanagey kind of vibe. And that's also, it
Breaks
restricts
creativity.
hills or, and because like the thing that like the thing that used to just like really get me going was when somebody would actually like you'd be working maybe like an emerging kind of up and comer young talent and it'd be like, hey, here's kind of a thing, why don't you go play in this domain and see what you do, and they would come back with something so fucking radical and that you would never be able to come up with ever. They did it, they ripped it, their creative engine is moving, they're following the pull, they're doing the shit, they have the autonomy to do it,
Right.
whatever it is. So you don't want to fixate on process, right? Because then you'll restrict kind of that whole serendipitous, magical, divine thing that occurs.
Exactly. We want to break
So
the academia mold. This is not for a grade. We're not worried about how you get to the answer. What is the objective? What is the result?
yeah, or better, yeah. I mean, there is no playbook to get to the answer, right? Like that's like the big pitfall of school. It's like, hey, we're going to teach you how this is done and how to repeat it. But in a real world context, like, hey, grow the business. It's like, okay, how do we do it? And it's like, I don't know.
How's your creative problem solving?
Yeah. It's like, well, you know, you got about 2,000 options. So here, you know, go. So anyway, I think the big learning for me was, and scaling ventures, I got to think like, you know, what is the culture? What are we about? Are we about getting up in people's shit and finding what they're doing and bing? No, we're about results straight up. It's like, yo, the results is the tip of the spear. That's what we look at. That's what we focus on. That's what we fixate. over. And then ideally we want to document how the sausage is made so that in the future we can say, hey, how did we get to that objective? Cool, here's what we did. Cool, whoever ripped this, what was the key learning? How do we kind of iterate on that? And then again, make it documented so that to some place in the future, we can provide playbooks to a certain extent where it's like, hey, here's something here's something to get the creative juices going. We don't want to bias your thinking. So there's a little bit of risk there that we would kind of, distort that creative energy that we just spoke about. But it's like, hey, here's kind of a general play or recipe for this. Hopefully it inspires you. You got 60% here to go. And then the remaining 40%, put your fingerprints all over it, let it rip, make it something that's inspiring, yada, yada. So I think the headline here is focusing on results over activities. And then of course, outcomes over inputs rather. Anything you'd add there?
Pause. Yes. Yeah. The quick thing that I would add would be a quick point for everyone that's watching. If you're working a job today and you feel as though you're not confident about the results that you're driving for your own role, your team, like that pod and the company, then it's time to have a conversation where you start managing up. We're not here to just collect the check and sit in seats. We're here to drive results. Even from a consulting perspective with my own practice with Centrometric, what we do in terms of transformation for SaaS companies, it's all a playbook to drive outcomes. You have a business objective to hit a certain revenue number. If we cannot get you there, no outcomes driven. As we're driving those outcomes, we're creating playbooks and then teaching our clients how we drove those outcomes so they can take those key learnings to every job they jump to, because it's about creating a different culture again that drives results. And that comes with educating people off of the playbooks on how you got there. So
well said, right? And then I think because that introduces way more discipline too, where it's like you fixate on the results. If the results aren't there, then you go into the inputs and the process. So it gives you a point of leverage when you're analyzing work product, when you're analyzing work streams, instead of just going like, hey, what are you working on? It's like, we should have some objective data-driven thing that's like a point of departure where it's like, hey, how are we performing against our base rates or against our goals or whatever? Cool, then we can dig into it. And to your point too, and I love the discipline that it introduces. Because it's like,
really,
generally understanding, because it's all about leverage, right? And that's, how do we put one unit of energy into a thing and point it towards the shit that gives us multiple units of energy back? That's how you thrive when you're under resourced or when you're kind of competing, yada, yada.
Exactly. So the best thing about leverage that it drives for people is understanding how to ask the right questions. Even as we work with AI, people are like, well, this can do my job for me, but it doesn't give me the right answers. You didn't learn how to ask the right question. How can you find your point of leverage if you don't know how to audit and ask the right questions? So that's the discipline. We drive that discipline to teach people how to think and ask the right questions so they can get to identifying those points of leverage.
Exactly. And then it creates alignment and then task clarity. So it's like, these are the objectives. These are the key results. If you find yourself working on some shit that doesn't touch the key result or the objective, stop what you're doing.
Yes.
And then back to your point, like that's a good, like in a different kind of bigger business context, like that's a good means for a conversation. Like, hey, I'm working on this activity, or if you want to call it managing up, and it's like, and I'm not really sure how this associates to the results we're trying to drive, which are going to help us achieve those outcomes. And that's just a great management conversation. So radical. Well, my dude, an hour just flew by. Holy smokes.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, well, man, I really did have fun. So shit, I hope that the world likes this and it's useful and it's a cool extension of what we're already doing. We'll leave it at that. I think the game plan is to get one of these going every other week, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you for hanging with me, my bro. Thank you.
Before we drop, for anyone watching, depending on where we post this, subscribe, comment, let us know how this can be better, and always come back for more because we'll be back every 2 weeks.
Yeah, feedback is the greatest thing you can give us. So, and be honest. If you respect us, don't sugarcoat it. Be honest. That's how we get
layer
down.
it on.
That's it. If it's like respect equals honesty equals speed. So we're all about speed. But thanks for tuning in. Till next time, for the love of the game. Cheers. Peace.
Go get them.
Boom.